How's it going, everyone? Sorry for Weather Sponge Drop. That was today. It's August 16, 2021, and today we're going to focus on three tropical cyclones that are currently in the Atlantic at this point, and we will talk and I'll give an in-depth analysis on Tropical Storm Fred as it makes landfall in Florida, as well as currently Tropical Depression Grace, which does have a chance of becoming a hurricane later in the week. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather icons. Make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather icons. So let's begin by taking a look at the current 5-day tropical weather outlook provided by the National Hurricane Center here in Miami, Florida. And you see we have three tropical cyclones we are currently watching. We of course have Tropical Storm Fred, which is pretty much at the Florida Panhandle's doorstep at this point, pretty much hugging the coast, and it's moving at a slower pace northeast at 9 miles per hour, with its minimum central pressure down to 994 millibars, but its maximum sustained winds are at 65 miles per hour, which means this storm is borderline a hurricane. We also have Tropical Depression Grace, which is pretty much centered right around the border of Dominican Republic and Haiti. At this time, it currently has maximum sustained winds of 35 miles per hour, minimum central pressure of 1,007 millibars, and it's moving west-northwest at 12 miles per hour, which is around an average speed for a tropical cyclone moving through the Atlantic. And we of course have Tropical Depression 8, which will likely become Tropical Storm Henry in the near future, where we have maximum sustained wind centered at 35 miles per hour, minimum central pressure down to 1,012 millibars, and it's moving south at 9 miles per hour, which is not very typical for a tropical cyclone, and I'll show you why. So let's first take a look at Tropical Depression Grace, which is currently centered over Hispaniola. At this time, taking a look at the current water vapor imagery, you see that we're seeing a lot of convection occur on the southern side of this storm, of course just south of where the high mountainous terrain of Dominican Republic and Haiti is located. But the thing is that a lot of this convection is displaced from where the center circulation is. So as a result, over the next couple hours, it's going to be very difficult for it to develop unless it develops a new eye offshore, where we're going to see that pressure, where we're going to see that low pressure essentially jump from this area to just south of Haiti, where there's a lot more convection and lift in the atmosphere. So we have to wait if that happens, but over the near future, it shouldn't develop that much. However, if as the storm moves further westward, there is a possibility that it will gradually develop over the next several days as a result of a lack of wind shear in the atmosphere. But you see, we do have a lot of convection, so this storm is at least somewhat healthy. It isn't dealing with a ton of dry air, or at least enough dry air to completely hinder the storm from developing. However, it is dealing with a little bit of wind shear, which I think will inhibit it from rapidly intensifying over the next several hours or even days, as it'll pretty much keep the center circulation displaced from where all the convection is occurring from. So as a result, I do not expect this to rapidly develop, maybe gradually develop as it heads further westward. If we were to take a look at the current wind shear map, you do see that it's currently in a small area where the wind shear is relatively light. Taking a look at but you see to the northwest of it, we're seeing relatively strong wind shear as a result of an upper level high that's located just to the south of where where Tropical Storm Fred is located. And that's bringing strong southerly wind flow in the upper levels of the atmosphere, which means that there's stronger wind shear in that area. And we also see stronger wind shear just to the east of this storm, but however, it's still in a small area where the wind shear is light. But you see what's ahead of it is just it might be stronger wind shear, because we do see the yellows, we do see the reds over Cuba, so that might inhibit its development over the next several days. Now, taking a look at what the GFS model is saying when it comes to relative to humidity in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, because it's important to determine whether this will develop or not. You see that there's a lot of dry air on the western side of the storm. However, it's small enough to the point where it's going to be somewhat isolated from the dry air, and the dry air won't completely swallow it up and kill this storm, as that seems unlikely at this point. It's going to be sort of in its own little world, but you see that the dry air that the area that's going to be affected the most by the dry air is the western portion of this storm. As you see that the western portion of this low pressure system is completely stable and very dry. But you see that the GFS model is expecting the moisture to wrap around and the dry air to get a little less as we head further westward. And the GFS expects quite a bit of strengthening just before landfall, where by 120 hours from now, 5 days from now, we see a 971 millibar storm, which is definitely concerning. And this is making landfall somewhere in Mexico, just south of Texas, but it should impact those in Mexico. Most likely, whether this is a tropical storm, tropical depression, or hurricane, but it's definitely concerning when we see the GFS bring this down to 971 millibar hurricane, which is equivalent to like a category 2 hurricane. Currently, the National Hurricane Center isn't that lenient on developing this into a very strong hurricane beyond a category 1. However, with the GFS model, one of the most reliable computer models persisting that this could develop into something pretty big, it's definitely something concerning, and we need to take into account when making a forecast. Now, take a look at what the European model is saying when it comes to the strength of the storm. If we were to move 120 hours from now, the European model is expecting a track further northward, but you see that the European model sort of weakens the storm just before landfall, and the reasons could be that it might deal with more dry air than what the GFS model is expecting, and also it might go over the Yucatan Peninsula, which could slow the storm's momentum down, and the mountainous terrain sort of could displace the lower level low with the lower level winds with the upper to mid level winds, which would make it more difficult for this storm to develop beyond the Yucatan Peninsula. But you see that the European model is also developing this into, like, I'd say a strong tropical storm, maybe a hurricane just before it reaches the Cancun area. So that's definitely something to watch, especially in Cancun, it's still summer over there. It's still a popular destination site for tourists. So if you're planning to go to Cancun in the near future, or if you happen to be around Mexico, there's something you need to, I'd say, prepare for, because especially if you're in the flood zone, because it's pretty much likely that you guys will experience impacts from Tropical Storm Grace. How bad the impacts will be and where exactly the strongest impacts will be, that still has yet to be seen. It really all depends on this position of this ridge that's located in the eastern United States at this point. If there's a little bit of a weakness in the ridging, then we might see the storm turn a little bit northward. However, if the ridging ends up being a little bit stronger throughout the United States, then we might see this storm take a further southward track. And for those in the United States, you might be concerned because it could come relatively close to Texas. However, it seems like the most likely scenario at this point is that it'll make landfall somewhere in Mexico. I think there needs to be a drastic change in the forecast to take this further northward to where impacts will be experienced in Texas. It's certainly not impossible. There's still certainly a possibility it might move northward and bring some impacts to Texas. However, I'd say the most likely scenario is that it's mainly impacts Mexico. So that might be good news for those in Texas, but not very good news for those in Mexico. So you guys need to pay close attention to this. And even in the Caribbean, like such as countries like Jamaica and Haiti and Cuba might experience impacts such as heavy rain, although this storm might not be very strong. So you need to pay close attention to that throughout the Caribbean as well, because there could be a pretty big flooding threat out of tropical depression or tropical storm Grace, which could cause a lot of flash flooding and potentially mudslides in those higher in the areas where there's higher elevation. So make sure to keep that in mind. Now, taking a look at what the National Hurricane Center is forecasting, you see that it's pretty much taking the storm further westward, and you see there's a large cone of uncertainty. You see that southern Texas is still in the cone of uncertainty right around Brownsville, Texas. You need to pay close attention to this, and even if this storm moves just south of the Mexico-Texas border, there's still a possibility you could experience impacts throughout southern Texas. So you guys need to pay close attention to that. But from Mexico, it seems likely that Cancun and a lot of the northern Yucatan Peninsula will experience impacts, and as well as Mexico, where we could potentially see a hurricane somewhere in Mexico. It could maybe happen just before it reaches Cancun. That's not out of the realm of possibilities, but I do think that we could see a hurricane just before it makes landfall somewhere in Mexico, or maybe comes close to Texas. So it's certainly something we need to keep in mind over the next several days. There's still a lot of uncertainty beyond the 3-day mark, so make sure to stay tuned to your local forecast. And in terms of tropical storm watches and warnings, we have tropical storm warnings issued for the southern Cuba coast, and tropical storm watches issued for Haiti, Jamaica, and Cuba, which is definitely something you don't want to see in Haiti after experiencing that devastating earthquake. My hearts go out to all of them in Haiti, but make sure to stay prepared for just a lot of flooding throughout these regions. Now, taking a look at our next tropical storm, which is pretty much right at Florida's doorstep at this point and going to make landfall very soon, is Tropical Storm Fred, where we do see that a lot of convection is currently happening in the center of circulation at this point, and it's actually gradually developing as it heads closer to the coast. Now, if this storm had a little bit more time over water, then it would have likely became a hurricane just before landfall. However, its time over water will be limited, and it's moving northward to the Florida coast. So as a result, this probably won't have a good chance of developing into a hurricane. It's not impossible, but it really needs to start developing rapidly for it to develop into a hurricane, because it's pretty much right along the Florida coast. We do see a lot of convection. Rain should be the issue, and even storm surge flooding is an issue across the Florida Panhandle, especially since they're very vulnerable to storm surge flooding. So you need to keep that in mind. But this storm is gradually developing just before it makes landfall, which is something we don't want to see. Taking a look at what the GFS model is saying, you see that the GFS model brings us towards land and just brings a lot of heavy rain, and this extends further northward, and the Florida Panhandle has a pretty good chance of experiencing flash flooding from this. In terms of the upper level winds that are going to be over this storm, you're going to see that this storm isn't dealing with a ton of wind shear right now. It's dealing with like light to moderate wind shear. However, in a way, it's sort of helping the storm when it comes to its max wind speed, especially on the eastern side, because the upper level winds are coinciding with the lower level winds on the eastern side of this storm, which is enhancing the wind speed especially on the eastern side of this storm. So as a result, the upper level winds are helping this storm strengthen its max wind speed a little bit. However, with storms like this, it's difficult for them to develop very rapidly, and it doesn't really develop into its max potential, because that wind shear will always weaken the western side of that storm, and as a result, it will never develop into its max wind speed. However, in cases like this with weaker storms, it sort of helps the eastern side of this storm strengthen its wind speed a little bit. So as a result, despite there being moderate to light wind shear, it's not strong enough to completely kill the storm, and in fact is enhancing it on the eastern side. So wind shear won't really be much of a problem for this storm as it heads to landfall. Taking a look at the moisture in the mid levels of the atmosphere, you're going to see that there's just enough moisture to support this storm developing over the next several hours, and it's definitely gonna and it's definitely helping this storm maintain its strength a little bit. If we were to take a look at the moisture levels throughout the center of circulation, you're going to see that the storm does have a lot of moisture with it, at least in the center, and there isn't a ton of dry air, so that's definitely helping this storm moving forward, and it's a reason why this storm is developing just before it makes landfall. Now, taking a look at the excessive rainfall outlook and the risk of flash flooding, you see that there's a pretty high chance of flash flooding throughout the Florida Panhandle. This extends just northeast of Atlanta, and we do have a slight risk, but still a risk of flash flooding even further northward of the landfall point. So Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, Maryland, all those states in the Northeast need to at least be aware that there's a possibility of flash flooding in your area over the next 3 days. Now, taking a look at the rainfall, taking a look at the projected path, you see that the storm is going to make landfall but quickly weaken into Wednesday morning, where we do see that this storm will weaken into a depression, of course, since it's going to lose contact with water, so it won't be able to absorb a lot of latent heat to really develop and induce a lot of lift in the atmosphere. So as a result, the storm will weaken rapidly as it makes landfall, and tropical storm warnings are issued all throughout the Florida Panhandle at this point. Now, taking a look at the rainfall forecast for Tropical Storm Fred, you see that there is a possibility of 6 to 10 inches of rain, which is just a lot of rain, and flooding is definitely likely with rain like this, and even a large area of 4 to 6 inches of rain could be possible. Now, for the storm surge forecast for this storm, you see that we do have a possibility of 3 to 5 feet of storm surge. So to put storm surge in perspective, pretty much go over land by the shore that's normally dry ground, add 3 to 5 feet of water to that, and that's pretty much storm surge for you. So remember that only 2 feet of water could lift up a car, and only 6 inches of swiftly moving water could knock you off your feet. So 3 to 5 feet of storm surge is just a lot of storm surge along the coast. Make sure to stay away from the shore if you live closer to shore in the Florida Panhandle, as storm surge flooding should be likely from this storm. Now, taking a look at our next tropical storm, tropical depression, or what will become our next tropical storm, Tropical Depression 8. It's currently centered just to the east of Bermuda at this time. However, you see that it's dealing with quite a bit of wind shear, but it should at least develop over the next several days as the wind shear and dry air won't necessarily be there, and the water temperatures will be just warm enough for development over the next several days. Now, taking a look at the projected path, you see it's going to move very slowly to the east and then move slightly northward, as the steering flow will be pretty weak with this storm. However, the main threat should mainly be to the coast of Bermuda, as currently the United States shouldn't experience much of a threat from this, but it's at least something to be aware of, especially if you want to go to a beach, because maybe this could cause elevated surf along the east coast. So make sure to at least keep that in mind along the east coast. But yeah, guys, I guess that's it. Oh wait, actually, let me show you just before I stop, let me show you my projected path for this storm. You're going to see that in terms of my projected strength, you see that for Tropical Storm Grace, I do expect it to become hurricane status just before it makes landfall along the Mexico coast at around 75 miles per hour, as I expect gradual strengthening because the dry air won't be much of an issue for this storm going forward, and the wind shear should at least be relatively light enough to where I do think gradual strengthening is likely as the storm heads further westward, and Tropical Storm Henry and Fred are Tropical Storm Fred should make landfall, and Tropical Storm Henry should be forming sometime in the near future. I'd say maybe by tomorrow or even as early as today. We have to wait and see. But yeah, guys, I guess that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather. Make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. And I hope you guys have a good day.